Masechet Beisah, daf 38. And we are continuing our discussion of eruv, tichumin on Shabbat and on Yom Tov. And these lead to some really interesting cases because you have like the theory of relativity going on here, where just like in relativity, the speed of a train or a rocket is one according to some perspective of one person, but different according to the perspective of a different person, depending on your frame. So too, a certain object, right? If I have this glass or my shirt or anything that belongs to me, just as I can go 2,000 amot in every direction from where I am or where I place my eruv, so too all my possessions have the same law. And that means that if I give you something on Yom Tov, you cannot take it anywhere that you can walk, your tichum, but rather it's limited to where I would be allowed to take my object. And so therefore you have to ask me, hey, where's your eruv? Where is your tichum? How far can you go? And you have to make sure not to carry my object further than that. And so this leads to some interesting cases. The Mishnah mentioned, Hashoel keli mechavero me'erev Yom Tov. If I came before Yom Tov and say, hey, listen, you know that this glass that you have, can I borrow it? And you say, sure, pick it up tomorrow on Yom Tov, right? But it's yours. In other words, you can borrow it, but you're not going to have physical possession. So in that case, it goes by the borrower. Since I went to you before Yom Tov and I said, can I borrow it? Even though it's not in my physical possession, since I have permission to use it, and I got that permission beforehand, so we already have in mind before Yom Tov starts that it will be wherever I go, the borrower. So we ask, Pishita, isn't that obvious, right? It's like mine. And so the answer is, because of the case that I just described, certainly if you gave me the glass before Yom Tov and I had it in my physical possession, then for sure it's mine and I can take it anywhere that I can go. But the chidush here is that even if I leave it in your house when Yom Tov starts, but I asked you beforehand and then I'll go get it on Yom Tov, even in that case, I can take it anywhere I want. I might have thought, since it's not in my physical possession, so therefore it goes by you, the lender, the one who's giving it to me. Nevertheless, no, that's not true. It goes by the borrower. And this inference we can prove supports Misaya Lel Rabbi Yochanan, Damar Rabbi Yochanan, Hashoel Keli Mechavero Me'erev Yom Tov, Af al pi shelo netano lo ela b'Yom Tov. There's explicit in Rabbi Yochanan's statement that says if I borrow something from my friend before Yom Tov starts, even if he didn't actually give it to me until Yom Tov does start, since I got permission, so you know what? It's already like as if it's mine. Harehu keragle hashoel. Okay, so that's case number one. I'm sorry, I skipped one paragraph right at the beginning. So let me go back 1 second. And here, Amar Shemuel said a statement, Shor shel patam, harehu keragle kol adam. Shor shel ro'eh, harehu keragle ota ha'ir. Shemuel taught that if I have an ox of a professional fattener, he would take oxen and stuff them so that they would be nice and fat and tasty. And then people would go and buy them during the week. On Yom Tov, people would go and take it from him and not exchange any money. But they would pay for it afterwards. So Shemuel's giving a big chidush, even though this fattener, he's in possession of the oxen when Yom Tov starts, and he doesn't know who's going to come and take it and acquire it. Nevertheless, it follows the tchum of the taker. However, shor shel ro'eh hareu keragle ota ha'ir. But ro'eh is different, because in the ro'eh, I own it and I give it to my ox walker, right? My sheep walker, rather, to go and walk it for me. But it's mine and I'm in possession. So in that case, if a ro'eh is taking from lots of different people, from his neighbors, then he can only walk as far as the smallest common denominator of the people of that city. Since he has all of their oxen. And so the question is, what is the difference between case number one and case number two? Right? In case number two, the shepherd has oxen of lots of different people. In case number one also, the guy has in mind, I don't know who's going to come take it. So you might say it also should be limited to where the fattener is, or maybe even more limited, if you want to say, to anyone who potentially might come and take it. Shmuel does not agree with that. The question is why. And one option as a reason is that he considers these oxen of the fattener to be like hefker, because since anyone can come and take it, and the owner knows, the fattener knows that he's not going to keep it, someone's going to come take it, and they're not paying for it on that day. So therefore, he says it'll belong to whoever ends up taking it. And so therefore, it's as if it's already there. Now, truth is, if it was really hefker, then even hefker owns a spot. If something is lost on the street, a watch or something, I can't move it 2,000 amot from wherever it was. So this would have to be even something like less than hefker, that it just doesn't have any spot at all, because he knows someone will take it and that person will acquire it when he does. Okay, it can't be that Shmuel thinks that it's retroactive, because we saw early yesterday that Shmuel thinks in the case where we share an ox and we have two different tchumim, we cannot move it, because you can't do berera on an ox when you're splitting it into two. But you're splitting it into two, and we don't know who has which side. But this case is a bit more lenient, because I know one person is going to come and take an ox, so he can go ahead and do it. All right, back to our cases of the Mishnah. And the next clause says, B'yom tov keragleh hamash'il. If I borrow something on Yom Tov itself, then the lender, right, the owner of it, that is limited to where he can walk. So even if the borrower, can walk farther in a certain direction, doesn't matter, because I borrowed it on Yom Tov itself. So we ask, B'shita, isn't that obvious? So yes, it would be obvious, but it comes to include even a case where I own this, this platter, and my neighbor comes and borrows it all the time, every holiday. They have a company and they always like to borrow this platter, so they borrow it every time, every day. And so therefore I expect, and so I expect them to come. And therefore I may be thinking, listen, even though they didn't come borrow it, maybe since I know that they're going to come borrow it, so already I consider it like it's theirs, and they consider it like it's theirs. So I might have thought in such a case, maybe in fact it is theirs, and they can take that platter and carry it anywhere in their techum. So this comes to teach them, maybe not. Maybe one time my neighbor will decide to borrow a platter from a different person. So it's not necessary that they're going to borrow my platter. So even because of that chance, it still remains in my possession until they come and borrowed it. And therefore, when Yom Tov started, it was mine. So this platter is limited to my domain. They need to come beforehand and say that they want to get it. All right, and now we're going to get to the main topic of today's daf, a long discussion, a long dialogue back and forth that is not only lively, but also a little bit complex, but very interesting. So the dialogue, they speak kind of in code, but we'll try to unpack it as simply as we can. This is this interesting case where a woman is making dough and she needs some salt. She ran out of salt. She goes to her neighbor, says, can I borrow some salt? I mean, obviously she'll give back something else after Yom Tov, salt or a different salt, or the money. She's putting it in the challah that she's baking. And the Mishnah said the surprising law that this challah is limited to where you can take it by both the salt owner and the dough maker. It's the lowest common denominator, that Venn diagram middle part of where they can both walk, because it has both ingredients. It has a flour from the owner, so the main dough can only go where the owner of that can go, but it also has salt in it, and the salt can only be moved wherever that neighbor put her eruv, but wherever her techum is. Okay, so that is the law of the Mishnah. And here we're going to wonder, why doesn't the salt get bitul? Why don't you nullify the salt? It's so little, right? Or the other case was spices. Water was a machloket, but so let's focus on this. So why doesn't it just say bitul? It's just a little bit of salt, and if a little bit of milk fell into a pot of meat, you would say, okay, don't worry about it, you can eat it. So why don't we say the same thing here? that the salt is not important, and therefore, thank you for lending me the salt, but I should be able to take this challah anywhere I want since I own the vast majority of the dough. That's going to be the question we're going to deal with. We're going to end all the way at the end with 3 answers plus 1, I think, that we'll see here. Okay, so we start with the story. Selek Rabbi Abba, Amar Yehed Ava de Ema Milita de Titkabel. So one time, Rabbi Abba, he went from Bavel and he went up, made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. And as he goes there, he's nervous because he's going to come to the yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, and he's an outsider. He's a stranger, and he wants to be accepted. So he makes a prayer and says, may it be Hashem's will that I will say words of Torah that will be accepted and that they won't make fun of me on my first day at school. Okay, this is a very interesting tefillah. Some people wonder, why is he asking this? Why doesn't he say, I hope that I say something true, emet, right? The correct halacha? Why is he so worried about his standing? And I think the answer is sometimes you might say something true, but nevertheless, you say it, you fumble, you say it in the wrong way, you do something and people make fun of you or they don't understand what you're talking about. So he says this tefillah. Turns out he was right to be worried, because here's what happens. Kiselek ashkechel Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Chanina, Bar Papi, Rabbi Zera. He comes and finds these 3 rabbis who were sitting together. Others who say the story say it was 3 different rabbis. Okay, either this rabbis or that rabbis, whichever one, doesn't matter. The key is, what was their question? What was the topic on the agenda of that day in the Bet Midrash? They were talking about our very Mishnah, and they were wondering, how come the water and the salt doesn't become nullified because of the dough? There's much more dough. There's only a little bit of water and salt. Let it be nullified, and therefore let the whole thing, dough, be mine, the baker's, so that I can carry it anywhere that I can go. And I don't have to worry that there's a little bit of salt from my neighbor and she made an eruv all the way the other direction because maybe she likes some speaker over there, or her grandmother lives far away over there. So why should that limit me? Why don't we say bitul like we would for pig and meat and milk and anything else? That's a really good question. So Rabbi Abba walks in from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, and he says, oh, I have something to add here. Right now is his chance to shine. Amar lehu Rabbi Abba, hare shenitarev lo kav chitin ba'asara kabin chitin shel chabero yochal hala v'chadeh. He says, let me give you an analogy. Let's say I have some wheat. I have 10 kav of wheat. And then somehow the 1 kav of someone else gets mixed up. I don't own it, right? And so, not that I necessarily stole it on purpose, but somehow I mismanaged, I mislabeled, and I took someone else's and I mixed it up with mine. Now, would you say bitul in that case? Would you say, oh, well, this is my friend Joe's wheat, but it got mixed up in mine. It's 10 to 1 is mine. So I'll say it's batel, and I can go and say, look, now I have 11. See how I gained, and eat his property, even though he's not allowing me to eat his property. I can go and just be happy that I gained a kav. Would anyone say that? No one would say that. Why? Why don't we apply bitul in this case? Because this is a case of ownership. And ownership is different from a prohibition. If I have a prohibition of milk and meat or pig and something kosher, then we apply nullification. But we do not, this is all Rabbi Abba saying, we do not apply nullification when it comes to property. I don't say, well, it's mostly mine, so I'll take all of it, right? If I have, some money and you drop a 20 and I drop my wallet, it gets mixed up. Oh, well, I guess it's all mine because bitul. No, you don't say bitul regarding ownership. And this is a case of ownership because the salt belongs to the neighbor and she says, mine, you got to return it, or it's equivalent. And so therefore, since she has ownership in this dough, and no matter how much extra stuff I put in there, no matter how little salt, still we don't say bitul regarding ownership. That's a fundamental difference. All right, this seems to be a very nice answer. Nevertheless, achichu aleh, the other sages from Israel, they laugh at him. And he is all upset. Amar lehu, gultaihu shakle. Says, why are you laughing at me? Did I steal your cloak? Did I play a practical joke on you? That I took your cloak and now you're upset that you're laughing at me and putting me down? So Rabbi Abba seems to be really upset. Some people say that did I steal your cloak is like, did I expose you that you don't know the answer to this, that you're putting me down? Okay, but we can just say simply, he's like, I don't understand. And when he said that, they laughed at him again. They laughed at him more. Oh boy. So Rabbi Abba really didn't get the invitation, the acceptance that he was hoping for, that he literally prayed for. But we're not sure why, because this seems to have been a good answer. And so then some other sages in later generation are going to come and discuss this very topic and try to defend Rabbi Abba and defend the sages. So that's going to be the next few steps. I have an outline of this so that we can keep the positions clear. The Mishnah said, salt of my neighbor restricts and is not batel. The sages in Israel were wondering, how come it's not batel? Rabbi Abba gave a simple answer: ownership does not become batel. Good. Okay, the sages laugh. We don't know why. But now what we're going to see is Rav Oshaiah is going to say that, hold on, everybody agrees with bitul. Bitul works all the time. And he just seems to either ignore or not agree with this distinction that Rabbi Abba said that ownership does not become batel. Rav Safra is going to come and defend Rabbi Abba in his absence, and Abaye will then respond. Rav Safra will defend again, and Abaye will respond. So let's see each step in turn. So we're going to Rav Oshaiah. Amad Rav Oshaiah Shapir Avu De'achichu Aleh. Right, when we read the story, we seem to think these sages in Israel, they're a bit mean, no, to laugh at a guest that's coming. But Rav Ashi says they had a right to laugh, because what Rabbi Abba said is totally wrong. Why? Look at this, how Rabbi Abba pulled the wool over their eyes. Look at the example that he brought. He was trying to talk about a case of salt in dough. Salt and dough are not like kinds. And generally, if you put something that is unlike, like milk in meat, since it has different tastes and it falls in, if it don't taste anything and don't see anything, that means it's so little. So it's easier to do bitul when you have two different kinds that mix with each other. And look at Rabbi Abba. He gives us an example of kav chitin in chitin, which is like inside like. And so you see, like in like is harder to do bitul because it's all the same thing. You can't say it's nullified in something else if it's all the same type of material. So that's, first of all, the analogy that he gave is not the same. He's trying to prove bitul from a case of min bemino to our case is min beshe'enomino, where bitul happens. That's first. And second of all, even min bemino, chitin bechitin namen, he did Rabbi Yehuda la batil, Rabbanan miftal batil. It's true. There's a machloket about that. And Rabbi Yehuda says, if it's like kinds, then even if it's a lot, you can't consider it nullified because it's all there. And only if it's different kinds, then it's different tastes, different types. And if it's so little that it's gone, then he'd say bitul. But even in min bemino, the Banan say you can do bitul. So you have a little bit of non-kosher meat and a lot of a little bit of non-kosher meat, a lot of kosher meat, and it all tastes the same, and you can't tell the difference. It looks the same. Then even in that case, the Banan say it is batel. Okay, so there you go. Rav Oshaiah says, first of all, you gave a case that's not equivalent, and then if it was equivalent, you would be wrong. In other words, he's saying that bitul works across the board. Either he's not picking up on the distinction between ownership and isur, or maybe more likely, he doesn't agree with it, and bitul can work all the time, even in a case of ownership. What would he say about this case of kav chitin? Would he really say you can keep that kav and eat it? Well, I think everyone would agree that you have to pay back the money, right? So that's true. You can't just steal it. But he would say that you can take, since it's indistinguishable, you don't have to just throw away all 11 kav or give it to the other guy. You can eat it. So yeah, there is bitul, even in ownership, it gets mixed together. And so too, in this case, there should be bitul. And that's why those rabbis in Israel had a question, on the Mishnah. How come the Mishnah doesn't have bitul? And that's why they laughed at Rabbi Abba, who's making up this thing that regarding ownership, there's no bitul. Okay, good. So that's where we are now. We're back at the question. Now Rav Safra is going to come and defend Rabbi Abba in with the case of pebbles. So let's look at this case of pebbles in wheat. Amar le Rav Safra, Moshe, Shapir Kamart. So he tells Rav Oshaiah, he calls him Moshe as a kind of honorific. You're so great. You're like Moshe, right? Or maybe as an oath, like Moshe. How could, by the life of Moshe, Shapir Kamat, is this correct what you said? And you said you could do bitul all the time, no matter what, even ownership. Haven't you ever heard of this statement in the name of Rav? Haborer sedorot migorno shel chavero hayav leshalem lo deme chitim. I go to your granary. You have all your grain piled up there, all your wheat there. And I go and I pick out the pebbles. Why would I do this? I don't know. Maybe I need pebbles for something. So I go and take out the pebbles. Now, do you care? You don't want the pebbles in there. They're impurities. So, it would look like I'm doing you a favor by taking out the pebbles. It's good. Now, nevertheless, I have to pay. I, who took the pebbles from your granary, I have to pay you for the space, as if the space of the pebbles was full of wheat. Why? Because usually when you have the granary and you go out to sell it, you sell it according to weight. And the stones are included in the weight. And everyone accepts it because there's some impurities. And so you would be paid actually for the weight of those stones, or for the volume of those pebbles that I took out. Therefore, I have to pay you back actually more, not just the value of the pebbles, which is zero, but rather for the space that I emptied out, right? Alma kila chasere. Therefore, you see the measure was reduced after I take all the pebbles. Now it's a few gallons less or a few pounds less. I have to pay you for that. Here too, I would say the same thing. That salt, however insignificant it is, still is not nullified. Here's the argument. If pebbles that are actually worthless and nobody wants them, nevertheless, we don't say they're batel in the wheat. They retain their own essence. And if I take it, I have to pay it back. So too, all the more so salt, which has more significance, more value than pebbles, all the more so when it's mixed in, it retains its status because it's owned by someone else, and therefore it is not batel. And so this is reviving the argument that something that is of monetary value, that of shared ownership, that someone cares about, is not going to be batel. And that is a proof for Rabbi Abba. So we now defended Rabbi Abba. Okay, brilliant. Now Abaye says, no, I don't. Abaye is now going to defend the sages of Israel and say, no, this is incorrect. Amar le Abaye, shani le lemor ben mamon sheyesh lo tovin lemamon she'en lo tovin. Says, hold on, there's a difference between money that something of value that people want. There's claimants to them. The case of pebbles, this is he wants compensation because this is actually valuable, not the pebbles themselves, but the space. And so, yeah, you don't say bitul because he really cares about that. But it's not the same as water and salt. She'en lo tovin. My neighbor who gave me a little salt, she doesn't care about that salt. She's not going to come and take that salt after Yom Tov is finished. Okay, maybe, right? I'll pay her back. Maybe she'll care and say, again, I need a little salt. I want some water. Okay, fine. But right now, she doesn't care about it. She forgot about it. And it's not worth anything. There's no claimant. And therefore, he would say, you're right. Ownership, if someone cares about it, yeah, maybe you don't do bitul. But if someone doesn't care about it, which is this case, then you should have bitul, even though technically they have a claim to ownership, but there's no claimant. They don't care about it. It's really worthless. So we should have bitul, and that revives the question on the Mishnah. All right. Now, Rav Safra has his last argument, and this is going to be a long one. basically the key point is going to be at the end, which is about hefker. Remember that watch example I said before? If there's a watch that was there from before Yom Tov, someone lost it, whatever, a few days ago, and it's there in the middle of the street. So it's up for grabs. It has no markers. Anyone can take it. The guy who left it there. So I can pick it up. The problem is that I cannot take it if I made an eruv 2,000 amot to the east. I can't take it all the way to the east 4,000 amot. It's limited to that 2,000 amot around that watch. It retains its own value. And what you see from here is that even something that has no value, no owner, no claimant, nevertheless has its own eruv, right? It has its own place. And you don't say it's just batel. Once I take it, okay, now it becomes mine, right? So even something that has no claimant does not become batel. And so therefore, that would be like the salt, which also nobody cares about, has no claimant, would not become batel. So that's Rav Safra's challenge. But he's gonna talk about another case before he gets there. So let's see. Amar levi litamich hada amar Rav Chisda nevela betela bishchuta lefi she'i efshar lishchuta sheteaseh nevela. What he's doing first is he's contradicting the first case, that something that has a claimant would be not batel. He's going to show that doesn't work either. Something that has a claimant is not batel. He is showing it from this case of meat and meat. If I have nevela meat, nevela is tameh. Besides not being kosher, it also causes tum'ah. And I have one piece of nevela that fell into a bunch of pieces of kosher meat. Kosher meat that doesn't is tahor. It doesn't cause tum'ah. And now it's batel. Why? Because it's impossible for the shechuta to become nevela. That's shechuta meat. Once I do shechita, it's tahor. It's never going to get the status of nevela in terms of it being tameh. And therefore, if it falls in, it's batel. And if someone touches the mixture, they're all right. They'll still be tahor. However, the other way around is different. Shechuta ena betela bin vela. If a little bit of shechuta meat falls into a lot of nevela, and so most of it is tameh, it's not batel. It's not batel. Meaning, so what will be the consequence? Since it's not batel, if someone touches it, there's safek tahor, safek tameh, right? And you don't say it's all tumah, it's all tameh. Maybe they test the shechuta piece. Why? Because in this case, the nevela can become shechuta. Now, it can't become kosher meat. What it means is that it can become not tameh. If you leave the nevela out till it rots and is no longer edible, once it's not food, something that's not food cannot retain tum'ah. So then the tum'ah leaves it. So therefore, you see, since it can become shechuta, so it's not going to be batel. Okay, so that's the law and regarding the difference. Now, why is this relevant to us? In this case, where you can have bitul this way and that way, would you say that, if it's owned, let's say the first case where it is, you can have bitul, if this nivela was owned by person A and the shechuta was owned by person B, would you say that then it doesn't become batel? Because there's ownership and ownership doesn't become batel, and then this law wouldn't apply? That would be strange. I mean, that would be crazy. That would be like any case of milk and meat or kosher and non-kosher, that mixing something, if it has different owners, it's not batel. So the idea that ownership, something that has a claimant, will not be bevatel, leads us to a strange conclusion in this case. So, would you think that? Okay. And if you think yes, indeed, right? Amar, if you would even agree with that, I have another question, follow up. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, hefker konin shebita, afapi she'en lahem be'alim, domin kemi sheyesh lahem be'alim. We have the law that something that was made hefker, ownerless, right? That watch in the street, nevertheless, it retains its own place, and it cannot be moved by anybody 2,000 amot around from where it is, even though it has no owner, no claimant, no worth, because no one has it. Nevertheless, it's as if it has an owner, it has an imaginary owner, and that will go around with it. And so you see that we don't we can it retains its status and retains its law, and therefore that is Abaye here saying, right? This was Rav Safra saying that. Which step are we up to here? Rav Safra saying the hefker, right? Hefker, this watch in the street, is not batel for eruv, not batel. And this is similar to the salt, which also has no claimant. My neighbor doesn't care about it, and nevertheless, it's not batel. And so that's Rav Safra backing up Rabbi Abba once again. And now we have a final statement of Abaye Amar le Mika midamet isura le mamona isura batel mamona la batel. It says, listen, I might even agree, because you brought some good sources, that in fact ownership, it cannot become batel, mamona la batel. But something that is a prohibition is batel. And what I disagree with you about is the categorization of the laws of eruv. You were assuming the whole time, Rabbi Abba and Rav Safra, that the laws of eruv have only to do with ownership. You own half of this animal. You own the salt that's in here, and that's why it's batel. I don't agree with that. I don't think it's a law of bitul, because it has an aspect of isur, it's prohibition. I mean, you can see that from this thing that's hefker. It's not even owned and doesn't own by anyone, but it retains its isur. This cannot be moved outside its tichum. So therefore, since it has you're right, it has an aspect of ownership that sets where it's going to be, because who owns it, but it also has an aspect of prohibition, and therefore bitul does not work for the cases of eruv, and that's his final answer. All right, so we had 4 stages of this argument back and forth among different sages, and so we have an explanation for the Mishnah according to the Rabbi Abba and Rav Safra, because they think that the laws of eruv have to do with ownership, and ownership does not become batel. And that's why when my neighbor gives me some salt or some water, and that's theirs, so then I cannot take this anywhere else. So we understand, that's why I made them in black. But the ones in red challenge it, and therefore they end up without any explanation for the Mishnah, right? They made fun of him. It's easy to make fun, but what about your own answer? So how will you explain the Mishnah? They're not rejecting the Mishnah. And so now we turn to that and we give 3 answers that all the rest of the rabbis will accept. So v'tamamai, why in fact is the salt in the dough not nullified? Answer number 1, Abaye, who was the interlocutor above, says, Amar gezerah shematase isa b'shutafut. This is a gezerah. If I allow a person to borrow salt and put it in, and they can go and take it around, so really technically fine. I could allow that. It should be batel. The problem is, right, that if I do that, then the next time I'm going to say, oh, can I borrow flour, right? I don't have enough flour and I'm going to mix together. And now this is a partnership, or let's make it together. And I'll say, just like when I borrowed the salt, that was okay. So too, if I partner with it and we both have significant ingredients, then also I can take it anywhere I want. And that will be not true. So therefore, people don't know how to make that subtle distinction. So we make a gezerah. That's answer number 1. Answer number 2, Rava Amar, tevalin ta'ama abidi. What are you talking about here? Spices, salt, and other spices, these give a lot of taste. And anything that gives a lot of taste is not going to be batel, right? Which is true in other areas of Yoreh De'ah as well, that if you can taste it, even if it's a small amount, so that taste is by definition not nullified because it's there and you can taste it. So the salt is evident even if it's a small amount. Rav Ashi amar mishum dahaveh le'davar sheyesh lo matirin, chol davar sheyesh lo matirin afilu be'elef la batil. Right, this important principle that something that will become permissible. Just wait till tomorrow. So why should I give you a permission to take this dough and move it wherever you want today, this bread? If you just wait till tomorrow, then that's it. There's no problem. It's after Shabbat or after Yom Tov, and there's no problem of limitations of Tichum. And then you can do whatever you want. And that's the general rule. If you could just wait and it'll be permitted because you want to bring it to your grandmother who lives over there, so then you just wait, and we don't apply bitul. Anytime you can wait, and in that case, it will be permitted to do. And so therefore we have these 3 reasons that say fundamentally it is batel, but for some other consideration, we say it's not. Actually, Rava is kind of fundamental because it actually is giving taste. And we have the other opinion of Rabbi Abba, who he was made fun of, but we saw he was onto something, and that significant idea that ownership does not become batel, only isur ve'heter can possibly become batel. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.